Once I understood the results that patients were getting with this, the next thing I realized is how many people weren't getting it yet.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 92 of the Strokecast. Olivia was one of my awesome inpatient OTs during my rehab at Swedish, along with Emilee and the rest of the team. And we stayed in touch after I got out. Longtime listeners have certainly heard me talk about Olivia before. Anyway, one day in an email, she excitedly told me about the new toy they had in the rehab unit, a $40,000 electrical stimulation bike. She was thrilled with how it helped her patients. If only my stroke had happened a year later. Later, I caught up with Emilee, my other OT, who you heard from last year in strokecast.com/Emilee. And Emilee also raved about this piece of gear. So they put me in touch with the company, Restorative Therapies, who makes the RT300 IFES rehab bike. So that's what I want to talk about today. eStim technology, restorative therapies, and the people behind restorative therapies. Finally, I also do want to talk a little bit about the Stroke Stories podcast at the end of this episode. So let's start with talking about eStim. eStim is electrical stimulation. It's often used to treat weak or paralyzed limbs, specifically to treat tone and spasticity. Basically, you attach electrodes to specific points on your skin and send a mild electric charge to those points. The nerve cell in the limb receives that charge and tells certain muscles to move. So the eStim itself isn't moving the muscle, it's telling the nerve to move the muscle that's there. Now, you usually feel a little buzzing at the side of the electrode, but it's not painful unless you really decide to just see how far you can go and crank up the power all the way. TENS, T-E-N-S, is the most common type. It's what I had when I was in the hospital, and later on, I picked up an at-home unit for about $40. It seemed like a good thing to have at home, and it meant that when I was doing outpatient OT, we didn't have to waste therapist time with going through eStims. I could do that at home, and I could spend time with my OT doing more specific tasks that I could only do with the OT. Anyway, they're nice and cheap, and a lot of folks do pick them up. I use it on my affected arm. Since I only have minimal ability to move my left fingers, I'm trying to improve that. When I use eStim, the unit activates the muscles in my arm and opens my hand for me. The benefit is that it gets those muscles moving, and it sends some data back to my brain so it can still work on building some of those new connections, since my brain can now see, oh, hey, there's movement here. Maybe I should do something with that. And it really becomes something I can integrate in with the rest of my therapy. Now, people use them for things other than stroke too. Most conditions that involve intact nerves, as well as tone or spasticity, can benefit from this technology. Other folks use TENS units for pain relief. And some folks use them for purely recreational purposes, but that's a scary section of the internet I don't really need to go down right now. FES is a little different from TENS. This is where you start to see some more real-world uses of the technology. FES is functional electrical stimulation. You may have heard of devices like the Bioness or the WalkAid. Those are FES devices. They are designed to make walking easier and help a survivor get rid of the AFO they have to wear. These units actually attach to a strap on your affected leg just below the knee. And as you take a step, they activate the nerve in the leg that controls the muscles that lift your foot. So they prevent foot drop. Unlike the TENS unit, which is designed to treat an area for 30 minutes at a time or so, these FES devices are meant to be worn throughout the day. They basically help you do other stuff like, well, walk. Restorative Therapies, the company we're talking about today, makes several therapeutic devices that use IFES. Restorative Therapies, the company we're talking about today, makes several therapeutic devices that use IFES technology, like the bike Olivia and Emilee told me all about. Here's how Wendy at Restorative Therapies describes it. Here's how Wendy at Restorative Therapies describes the technology. Integrating that motor then helps get, not only are we sending the signal to the muscles through the stimulation, but we're actually assisting them in the motion as well.
Absolutely. And we call that IFES, or integrated functional electrical stimulation. Our device uses very complex software algorithms to ensure that those muscle contractions are in perfect coordination with the pedal motion, so that patients can get progressive resistive exercise along with using the FES to stimulate their muscles.
A lot of people say practice makes perfect, but that's not true. It's actually perfect practice that makes perfect.
That's right. It's actually high intensity training, or they call it massed practice is what we refer to it as in rehab, is, having those muscles contract over and over and over, not only to strengthen the muscle, but also to help patients learn how to use their muscles again. Oftentimes after stroke motor planning, or being able to have your brain tell your muscles how to perform a task is sometimes disrupted. And so, that high intensity training that you can get using the RT300 is really, really important.
Yeah, and that also calls to mind, when I get on my traditional exercise bike here in the apartment, I can certainly pedal and I can do it for an hour or so, but, if my adductors, the muscles on the inside of my thigh, are not keeping my weak leg in alignment, then I'm just teaching myself how to pedal with my leg in the wrong position, which can actually go ahead and cause further problems down the road as I teach myself to do it in an inappropriate manner.
Bill, what we're talking about here is why our integrated FES is just so powerful. And you're only covering a couple of the elements. It's also biofeedback system. If there's an imbalance, the avatars that we have will cycle off the road. So, you need to rebalance and not continue practicing in a way that's unbalanced. And when you look at the algorithm and the stimulation signal, the electrical signal, and the different settings we can do to maximize contractions, and how it's all coordinated. So all these muscles are contracting at the right amount at the right time to perform a function. That's pretty sophisticated. And a lot of time and energy has gone into developing this with a lot of the leading researchers that I go and talk to. As we develop this product, we work with them, and they tell me, intent is important so that they can look at this avatar, know they're about to move, and then communicate intent from their brain. And so we integrate all those capabilities into one system, one therapeutic system. And I think that's what really makes it so powerful and just so unique out there.
The bike itself is really cool. It can treat arm, leg, and core weakness, or it can do them all at once. It's also built in a way that you can just sort of roll a wheelchair right up to it, or bring it over to a mat table. Once the therapist hooks up all the electrodes, you can start using it, and it teaches the body the right sequence in which to move the muscles and send info back to the brain to pedal and keep you on path. The other big product that Restorative Therapies has is the Excite unit. Now, this isn't available for home use, but I got to try it out in the lobby of a Hampton Inn in Linwood, Washington with Stephanie and Michael. You can see pictures in the show notes of my experience with the Excite. You can find those over at strokecast.com/RSI. This one's a little bit different. It uses a whole bunch of electrodes to fire different muscles in a specific sequence. For example, when you reach out to grab a bottle of water and bring it to you, all the muscles in your arm have different jobs to do at different times in order to bend the elbow the right way, retract the arm, open the wrist, open the fingers, close the fingers, and all of that at different points in the sequence to do just that simple act. And the Excite fires those in sequence. Here's how Jim describes it. What are the things that you're most excited about today? What are the products that are really sort of get you going?
I think right now the Excite is a relatively new product. It's been out over 2 years, and it's just now getting traction. And it's really cool because of the menu, and I can let Wendy talk more about it, but I think it's really cool to have a menu of activities of daily living that you can click on and actually do, right? And I think that the really cool thing is the moment you hook that up to someone and they try it for the first time, and, someone who's sensate and can feel things, and you just say, hey, relax and let's see what happens. And you watch them, brush their hair. It's like the coolest thing to see. Or being able to feed yourself. That's another common one that we see in the menu that people like to use. I mean, these are important basic things and help with people's independence. It makes a big difference in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything to support my addiction to food, shelter, and clothing is always a good thing, and supporting that. I will say one of the interesting things was when I tried it on my arm, one of the things that was just really interesting was just how natural it felt as it started moving my fingers and my wrist in a way that they just haven't moved on their own in over 2 years.
Wow, that's really cool to hear that, Bill.
Yeah. Now, this matters for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it can help you do those ADLs, those activities of daily living, without the device at some point in the future. The bike is available for home use, which means Restorative Therapies does have to explain benefits to insurance companies. And it turns out it can help reduce costs for them while benefiting patients.
We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary for the company, and we're based here in Baltimore, Maryland.
15 years is amazing for a technology-focused company.
Yeah, it's been quite a run. It was technology that was first tried on Christopher Reeve, who was a famous actor. The power of the technology from there has just developed and evolved since over the last 15 years.
Oh, that's awesome. So I mean, what drew you to the organization?
What impressed me the most and was most attractive for me was once I understood the results that patients were getting with this, the next thing I realized is how many people weren't getting it yet. And even though it had been around 15 years and used in all these studies and trials, I was trying to, the real challenge for me that I was attracted to is how do I make people more aware of this and get access to these folks that it could benefit that aren't yet aware of it, even though we're in over 650 clinics in the U.S. and over 1,000 clinics globally. We're still just getting to about 3 or 4% of everyone in the world we need to get this technology to. And it's amazing how many locations there are where everybody's involved. And I think our challenge is how do we get the message out to everyone, dispersed across the country, going to all these institutions, and how do we get the message out to all the OTs and all the PTs? And it's a big community. There's 310,000 PTs and OTs in the United States. We have even our head of research and development jumps on these calls as needed to make sure the insurance companies understand, the benefits of these things medically and even financially for these folks. That helps, reduce things like they tell us it reduces their rehospitalization rates and other things that happen to them. And so there's a benefit in so many dimensions for these folks. And we educate the reimbursement folks for that too, the payers.
Oh, and that's important because, we talk about these types of things. Not only is, a therapy or a device great for getting you walking or standing or using your arms again, but, when you start talking about rehospitalization, if these devices can contribute to improving my walking and my balance, so I'm less likely to fall and hit my head and re-injure myself, and in addition to just the other complications that can come from lack of movement, to just start moving things, getting that blood circulating, getting that motion happening again, really does have a lot of other long-term benefits and reduced insurance costs down the road.
It's amazing the impact. We have a 6-minute video on our webpage where we've interviewed some patients to see what the impact was on their life. And the one lady, Patty, she's on there and talks about a brain injury that is a similar effect to what stroke would be. And her feedback was it gave her the confidence to go back out with her friends and be able to get out into the world. And I think that that confidence is what you're talking about, is that really impacts people's lives and lets them get back out and doesn't, trap them inside.
And Wendy explains that it's not just about the affected limbs. See, when we don't move as much, we can also lose strength in our core. Plus, left or right-sided weakness isn't just about the limbs, but all the muscles on that side of the body. So, one of the things we think about when we're talking about recovery and mobility is we get focused on the arm or the leg, but when we're talking about hemiparesis and left or right-sided weakness, it's not just the arm or the leg. It's, obviously the face that we think about, but it's also all those other core muscles that go through our chest, that affect our balance, that affect, how we sit up, that affect all of these other things. And most therapies, we don't think about of dealing with the core. So could you talk a little bit about what you do with the core muscles, the chest, and how that sort of comes into play?
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of our FES therapy systems, we're able to utilize channels of the stimulation to stimulate muscles that help with posture. So your back muscles, your lats, your abdominals, these muscles that help maintain an upright posture. So, it's often really difficult after a stroke when you have a lot of weakness to sit upright, to bring your shoulders back, to open your chest for breathing. So the FES can really help not only with strengthening those muscles, but also, again, with the education, helping patients learn how to kind of turn those muscles on and stabilize their core better, which then allows them to have better distal function, so better arm movement, better leg movement. Everything comes from having a stable core. You can certainly use the FES to train and regain those functions.
What's really interesting about that, too, is that when we talk about that stable core, it's about balance, it's about all those other things. But all of those muscles also then impact, as you said, breathing, which we don't think about as being impacted by hemiparesis, or digestion, because you've got muscles running through there that are managing your whole digestive system, your swallowing, all end-to-end process is all part of the core. And being able to strengthen that and not just neglect that, it goes so far beyond just the arm or the leg.
Yes, it sure does. It's very important to address the core musculature.
Now, let's talk for a minute about the dreaded P word, plateau. First of all, it is, of course, nonsense that recovery only happens in the first 6 to 12 months after a stroke. Many survivors do feel or are told that they may hit a plateau in their recovery from which they stop getting better. I find this to be a very dangerous idea. Instead, recovery is really like a stairwell in a tall building. We do the work to climb the stairs, but at a certain point, we're not getting any higher. We think we've hit a plateau, but we haven't. What we've done is hit a landing in the stairwell, where it's flat for a little bit as we turn around and get ready to begin climbing up the next flight. Folks who are 5, 10, 20, or more years out from their stroke might not be in therapy anymore. So I asked Wendy if these devices can still work for them or if they need to do other stuff first.
The amazing thing about FES is that as long as your nerve is still intact, your muscle will still fire. And for stroke patients, that's the case. Your nerves are generally intact unless you've had some other type of injury. And so when we apply FES, we're able to get the muscles contracting again. And we're also then able to get all the benefits of that, which includes increasing their range of motion. So that's often an issue after stroke with spasticity or tightness that develops. We can help using FES to not only build back the muscle, but improve that range of motion, reduce the spasms that they're having or the tightness or spasticity they're experiencing, and also improve the circulation. And along with that, muscles firing in a coordinated pattern, patients can also undergo, a certain level of activity that they may not have been able to undergo with any other type of treatment technique. So, yes, even patients who are many years post-stroke or other neurological condition or injury definitely can still get gains and benefits. And, of course, we always recommend that they're evaluated by a therapist.
It's pretty cool stuff, and I've enjoyed working with the whole team on this episode. I love learning about what makes folks in the stroke or stroke-adjacent communities tick as well, why they chose the paths that they did, and to learn more about how the company works with survivors. So let's meet the folks we've been hearing from. Wendy Warfield is the Clinical Education Manager at Restorative Therapies, and Jim Janicki is the President and CEO of Restorative Therapies. And Wendy, before you joined Restorative Therapies, you were actually one of those folks. You worked directly with patients as an OT.
Yes, absolutely, Bill. Yep. I'm an occupational therapist and I have been working in neurorehabilitation for almost 15 years. And it was actually the work that I did at the Kennedy Krieger Institute using the RT300 as part of, a treatment tool for my patients that had neurological conditions, which really drew me to really want to come here to Restorative Therapies and be a clinical educator and just share, all of the great benefits that I was seeing with my patients who use the RT300 with just the greater world overall of clinicians out there so that they could help their patients gain access too. I was seeing patients, improve their health, feel better, improve their function, be able to go back to daily living because they had very little ways to, undergo any type of physical activity. If you're immobile, it's very difficult to get exercise, especially cardiovascular exercise. So being able to undergo the benefits of that type of therapy was really life-changing for my patients. And it was just really apparent to me that I really wanted to tell others about this.
So you came to the company already loving the core product and seeing the results.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And from here, we've grown our product line to include so many other offerings to, not only have FES integrated ergometry therapy systems, but also, now to create Excite, which was just released in 2017.
What is ergometry?
Ergometry or cycling. So, integrating a motor with electrical stimulation in order to help patients undergo activity again that they otherwise have very little or no other opportunity to undergo.
What made you want to go into occupational therapy to begin with?
It's actually a funny story. So when I was in high school, I was just like any other, high school student kind of searching for careers and trying to figure out what I wanted to major in college. And I had a cousin who's about 10 years older than me, and she had finished school to be an occupational therapist and was out working and actually doing early intervention with children, and she was really just loving her job. And I was talking to various people about their careers, and I started talking to her, and her passion and enthusiasm for the ability to help her pediatric patients that she was working with and positively impact their development and help their family, it just shined through her face. I just, I felt so captivated by the fact that here was somebody I was talking to who truly loved what they were doing for their career. And I thought, you know what? I want to do that. I want to be happy. I want to help others. And a long time, had gone by, I thought about, other professions in health, like being a doctor or a nurse and things like that. But when I talked to my cousin, who was an occupational therapist, it just really, became so apparent to me that I wanted to do what she was doing and be able to have that impact on others' lives. So, 15 years later, here I am, and I'm so glad that I made this choice and have been able to positively impact so many patients throughout my journey.
So, Jim, your career has been through more of the traditional sales and marketing side, and what drew you to the healthcare space as an industry?
I've been working in healthcare for decades now, and my technical training was actually in chemical engineering, and I was in the early phases of bringing more engineering into medical devices at a time when it was more scientists, and we were trying to figure out how to make the technology more accessible to more people and take it from the laboratories. And what was really interesting is transitioning from that and doing a bunch of diagnostic things to coming in here and seeing a device hooked up to a patient in person and seeing some of these patients come close to tears, wondering, oh, did we hurt them? What's that about? And they were actually just emotional about seeing their muscles contract for the first time, some of them in decades. And, you don't get to experience that in other medical devices. You're not there when the physician implants it or when a diagnostic is run. And it's that it grabs you. This business will change you. You really get to experience the transition these people go through there in person. And it's just, how many jobs do you get to do in life that are like that? And I thought, wow, let's do it. That's what I want to do with my life. Yep.
So, one of the things we talk about, your company launched their new tagline of "Your Advocate for Life." What does that mean?
What we realized is, this is part of our DNA here. This is part of our company and where we came from in really working closely with our patients and following them and helping them out. And, we realized, hey, we should be upfront about what we're about. And we're about advocating for these patients. In some ways, it expresses itself. For instance, we just had the longest reimbursement process that we've gone through, where we won 100% reimbursement for a patient for a device. And it took us 3 years to do it. And we stuck to it. We don't give up. And we have patients who need devices quickly so they don't, deteriorate. And they'll buy these devices up front. And even though they bought them from us, we will fight for years to get the maximum reimbursement for them from their insurance. So we stick with them. And that's just one example of how we care for these patients.
Oh, that's great. I think one of the biggest challenges a lot of patients in the United States have, at least, is just you're suddenly thrust into this world. Your life is turned upside down. Your body and brain aren't working the way they're supposed to. You may have lost your job, your income, and you've survived, and now you're suddenly thrust into this world of hospital and medical and insurance company bureaucracy that you have to try to figure out when your brain is now broken. So, Wendy, one of the things that I see when I look at what you're doing and looking at the products and the difference between the clinical space and the commercial world, how is being an OT sort of helped or hindered your ability to navigate the more traditional corporate product world?
Well, it's been just such a unique opportunity to work in industry and be able to collaborate with, incredible engineers who are developing this technology to ensure that the way that they're set up is not only easy for a therapist to use from their perspective, but also so that it provides exactly what the patient needs. So as we continue to develop our product line, specifically when we recently developed Excite, we were really having a very close integration of clinicians working with engineers, which is just the absolute right combination to have the perfect device. So that's been, I would say, probably the thing in my career that's been the most interesting, that I've enjoyed the most, is that opportunity to be engaged in that product development, but then to watch it go to market and see how these products that we're developing are able to help these patients, not only in therapy, but then also at home. It's just been a really amazing opportunity.
You're offering these products for both the commercial space, selling into the hospitals and healthcare systems, as well as to the home market. And those are two very different markets and sales processes. And how do you manage those processes differently?
We have literally people we call patient advocates that work with the home patients directly. They're in touch with appropriate charities and assistance organizations based on the state that the person is in. So we know more of their local circumstances. They help them through their different payers and how to, be able to finance or afford the devices. And they work with them on any challenge that comes up to help them get through that. And so I think that's what's very different from calling on, say, a hospital or a clinic where they'll have people who are more familiar with the technology, or more technical and more clinical, whereas we, try to help navigate all the complexity for the home patients.
Gotcha. To make it as easy as possible for them to, ultimately get the therapy that they need.
Exactly.
So what does your onboarding process look like for a customer or a new user once they've got the device in their home, or what happens from there?
Yeah, so we have many patients who have stroke who are using our equipment at home. And what it looks like is we have a group of installers. So these are clinicians who are highly trained, who most have used the device clinically in their practice in a rehab clinic. And they work for us on a contractual basis. And we assign them a patient who has gotten a device recently, and they will actually go to the home. They'll assemble the device. They will make sure that the therapy downloaded properly on their device, make any adjustments to make sure it's of optimal comfort to the patient, and then provide any caregiver training or family support to ensure that the patient is able to continue using it and feels comfortable and trained in their setup. And then going forward, we have a team of clinical specialists here who provide support for our home patients across the lifespan, Advocate for Life. So these patients can open up an appointment with us. They can give us a call. We can actually look at all of the session data as long as their device is connected to their home Wi-Fi or home internet. All of the sessions that they've performed will be downloaded into our database, and we will be able to take a look at how they're doing and make some suggestions or even remote changes so that we can make a change to their therapy and have that therapy download onto their home device. So we really do provide long-term support for our home customers well beyond the installation.
In the previous episode, I talked about the quantified self and how getting specific measurements about our performance can help with recovery. This kind of data is something that comes up a lot with technology providers in the stroke field. Last year, I talked about it with Raccoon Recovery's Lana Malovina and with Lauren Sheehan when she was with Neofect. It's also an element behind Dr. Nirav Shah's startup, Sentinel Healthcare. Collecting and securely sharing our data is incredibly valuable. And restorative therapies helps that too. And that continual feedback is then becomes really interesting too in providing that performance data. And then is that something that they can also share with their physiatrist or their outpatient OT or PT or however they're continuing to engage in their recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So the patients can actually log into the database as well and look at all of their sessions and all their progress data. And, Bill, from your own personal experience, patients with stroke often recover function and, they sometimes recover function even long after their initial stroke. So we do see that with our home patients, that they recover and that they are able to, produce more power, have better, functional measures and things. So we always hear our patients saying that they're changing and having gains. So they can access all their session data on their own. Their therapists can access the data as well if they have a clinical login to the system. And we also can provide those reports from the system to, for example, email to a physician if the patient would like.
Being able to have that quantified data available to actually see your progress is really helpful.
Yep. And you can almost see a snapshot of every session you've ridden in the form of a graph on our database. So you can look at the progress data session to session and also kind of get a snapshot of that performance improvement over time.
So, if folks want to know more about the FES devices for their personal or institutional use, what should they do?
Well, I think, what's important is to contact, get in touch with our webpage. It's www.restorative-therapies.com. And there's a contact form you can fill out, and we'll contact you. A patient advocate will contact you and walk you through the process. They can help you find a clinic near you that checks you out, and they can do all that for you and just inform you about all the details and better understand your specific condition and needs, and they'll take care of you. But I say fill out that contact form and we'll get right back to you.
So thanks again, Olivia, and thanks, Emilee, for, not only helping me learn to use my arm again, but of course also for putting me in touch with Jim and his entire team. On another note, if you're looking for an additional stroke-related podcast to follow, check out the Stroke Stories podcast. It's put out by the Stroke Association in the UK. Each week, they feature a different stroke survivor's story, and it's a pretty diverse collection of folks from around the world. I actually joined them for a recent episode, episode number 50 of Stroke Stories, where I tell them my story. One interesting thing about the show is that they cut out the interviewer in the edit. The narrator provides some context and some descriptions, but the guest is really the only one you hear talking for most of the show. I sort of took a hybrid approach in this episode of Strokecast, I suppose, although I can't quite cut myself out altogether. I'll link to my appearance on Stroke Stories in the show notes over at strokecast.com/RSI, or you can just search for Stroke Stories in your favorite podcast app. And that brings us to our hack of the week. Let's hear more from Wendy.
Big one is just move. You have to move your body. And because patients who, have spasticity as a result of a stroke, or they have weakness as a result of a stroke or other neurological condition, they're just so limited in their ability to engage in activities. And so just finding avenues for movement to keep your joints moving, to reduce your spasticity, to help keep your muscle mass. All of these things are just so important to maintaining your overall health and, being able to go back to doing any type of activity, whether it's an activities of daily living in terms of caring for yourself and being independent, or if it's something more complex, like, being able to, ride your adapted bike over to the school so that you can volunteer again. There are so many ways that we can help patients get back to the meaning and purpose that they had before the stroke happened and find new and creative ways to do that. But staying healthy and moving and, maintaining that quality of life and the physical integrity of your body is so important. So my best advice is just to find avenues like use of the RT300, like use of FES to help you continue moving and maintain your health so that you can do all the other things that you really love and enjoy.
So that's it for this week. To learn more about the RT300 bike, the Excite device, or Restorative Therapies, be sure to check out their website. I'll have links to that over at strokecast.com/RSI. Ask your PT or OT about their thoughts on IFES technology and devices. Share this episode with someone in your life by giving them the link strokecast.com/RSI. Subscribe to Strokecast and Stroke Stories in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.